Kira Muratova is considered one of the biggest prodigies of the post-Soviet age art house cinema. Her style alluded to French New Wave, yet still managed to look nothing like others. Muratova widely utilized absurd repetitions of dialogues, grotesque characters, and especially mise-en-scène for social commentary. Her early work stood out by vast critique of the social decay and the rot of moral, humane foundations, which proclaimed her films as chernucha, an infamous Russian slang word for depiction of something really black and deliberately pessimistic. Muratova's career wasn't easy. Her films were released for a general Soviet audience only in 1987, and in North America her craft is still largely unknown. In this video we will trace thematic and stylistic patterns from 3 films she directed, contextualizing them within political changes and new wave cinema tendencies. Kira Muratova was born in 1934 in Moldova, but spent most of her upbringing in the Ukrainian city Odessa. She had the misfortune of beginning her career at the outset of Brezhnev's stagnation, the time from the mid-60s to 80s, which was characterized by the economic difficulties that developed when Leonid Brezhnev led the Soviet Union. The struggles that the Soviet state faced during that time extended to art and culture. The strict ideological control took over any freedom of artistic exploration that didn't fit the brackets of imposed socialist realism. This ideology incorporated portraying Soviet reality through clearly optimistic lenses and focusing on themes of collectivity and state progress. Socialist realism was the foundation of Stalinist-era cinema, but it continued working full force during the Brezhnev era as well. In 1967, Kira shot her debut film, Brief Encounters. The film follows the story of a country girl, Nadia, who moves to the city and accepts a job as a maid at the house of Valentina, a pedantic counselor and wife of Maxim, and a nonconformist geologist who had an affair with Nadia in her hometown. What from a first glance sounds like a good old love triangle story proves to be a more complex exploration of power imbalance between the 2 women. Nadia is a humble, soft and romantic girl from the village, and Valentina, who is by the way played by Muratova herself, is a pure juxtaposition, an exemplary Soviet woman, pragmatic and with a professional interest. No wonder that at first she barely takes Nadia seriously. Maxim is an idle wanderer who embodies a free-spirited absent man archetype, living in flashbacks and recollections of 2 different love stories rather than in a present-day film narrative. He is a kind of man who is never there, yet somehow remains the center of the world for both women.
Я подумал, терпел. Ну, на кой мне все это сдалось? И ушел. Теперь я вольная птица. В пределах реальности, конечно, но все-таки вольная.
The plot is told through a nonlinear structure, repeatedly getting interrupted by those flashbacks and shifting perspectives. This proposes 2 important messages. First, it highlights the idea of love as an elusive and never-present entity, tangible only in retrospect. Secondly, it slowly unveils the theme of an untold narrative. When Nadia comes to Valentina's house, she expects to see Maxim and is clueless that the woman she is speaking to is his wife. Valentina confuses her for a new housemaid, and Nadia goes along with the offer, accepting it either out of shock or perplexity. Throughout the film, the 2 navigate their estranged relationship, but Nadia never confronts Valentina about her connection to Maxim. Her narrative stays forever untold, as after spending enough time under the same roof and fully grasping the weight of Maxim's 2-sided game, she accepts her defeat and leaves the house just before he arrives from another trip. Nadia arrives and departs before Maxim returns, so he will not know that she had come to find him. Muratova emphasizes the lack of room for Nadia visually. In the final scene, when Valentina is making a table in light of Maxim's expected return, the camera is placed in a way that there is no place for a third. Film critic Vladimir Gulchenko pinpointed that Brief Encounters is less of a love triangle story than 2 separate storylines that meet somewhere beyond the frame. Muratova reshapes the standard trope of melodrama, which is waiting for a gunman, into the enforced flaw of female nature. Waiting for the absent man reads as women's emotional labor, a burden all women inevitably carry. In the end, the most intriguing relationship is that between the two women, rather than between either of them and Maxim. And absurdly, this particularly narrow focus on women's affective life and their intricate relationships is what upset the Russian censors the most, as they condemned the film for its emphasis on mелкотемье, or in other words, petiteness. In simple terms, the censors implied that these issues were so negligible, peripheral, and secondary that they were not worth of focusing on in the first place. After all, there were more important things a Soviet film should address, like a man in his historical process, man in his epic. Come on. Muratova commented on Soviet projects through the environment your characters inhabit and are constantly involved in. In brief encounters, a construction site can be interpreted as an allusion to socialism. Valentina is the housing authority that has to deal with the water supply issue at a newly constructed residential building. The residents are hesitant to move in despite no water supply, while builders are eager to state the building complete and move on with a new project. These situations reflected the gap between Soviet utopian claims and the reality of everyday life. The incompetence of ensuring a bare minimum like running water in a new building touches on the systematic inefficiencies, but people's indifference and passivity to advocate what they deserve is also a prevalent social problem worth being noted. Additionally, the film directly refers to the city it was shot in, since Odessa was known for its single water source and water droughts, and Muratova wanted a bureaucrat woman protagonist who dealt with the issue. The outlook of the film, with its atmosphere of disorder, was thought to be too gloomy, and the formal approach maniered and pretentious. The focus on the character's emotional life was also deemed as a bourgeois rather than a socialist ideal. Luckily, Kira's colleagues recognized her peculiar talent and put their best effort into giving her at least some opportunity to work during the worst years of 70s and early 80s. The next film for our inspection is The Long Farewell, released in 1971 and cited as that one Muratova film influenced by the French New Wave movement the most. Muratova herself aligned her chaotic style with Parajanov, whose approach was fiercely disputed in the Soviet Union while being ironically very representative of it. The plot centers around the complicated relationship of a divorced middle-aged mother, Zhenya, and her teenage son, Sasha, that becomes strained after Sasha's recent summer vacation spent with his father. Zhenya is confused at the sudden distance growing between her and Sasha, but when she learns her son is planning to relocate to his father's house, her life becomes restless. From Sasha's perspective, his mom seems overbearing, heavy-handed, and just consuming too much of his air. But from Zhenya's point of view, losing a son to a man who once left her and their child just feels exasperating. There is a joint theme of growing older both mother and son are navigating. For Sasha, it's a journey about maturing and figuring out his relationship with women, both romantic and parental figures. For instance, the abrupt, disjointed montage of Sasha and appealing companion Masha, so reminiscent of Truffaut's style, conveys a hidden erotic aspect of their interaction. Shy and reserved, Sasha is captivated by the girl, letting her take the lead. For Zhenya, the journey of growing older implies a struggle of detachment from her child and acknowledging him as a separate, independent human being. The heart of the problem ultimately lies in a lack of direct communication between mother and son, and given that Zhenya works in the language department in charge of ensuring that direct communication, makes the situation even more paradoxical. This idea of hindered communication is amplified in scenes with overlapping dialogues, showing the raw and imperfect reality of human connection.
Хорошо, она удивилась?
Удивилась.
Ну,
Ну, конечно, удивилась. Ну, говорит,
Ага.
кто это звонит? Ну, а я говорю, Павлик это звонит. Ну,
Ну,
потом
ну,
она,
что
значит,
дальше?
она меня спрашивает.
Ну что она?
Но я
ну,
отвечаю, я ей отвечаю. Но я ей, значит, говорю, что,
Что
мол,
ты говоришь?
Устинов
что она тебе говорит?
уехал. Я говорю, Устинов уехал и передал поклон.
А она что?
Ну, она...
Что она?
Но она, значит, говорит, что, мол, потом она смеяться начала. Потом
слышал я.
Я смею, то есть я трубку повесил.
Видел
В
я.
смысле, она трубку повесил. Потом я трубку повесил.
Видела, как трубку повесил? Дурацкое зрелище. Кретинское просто.
The Long Farewell is very realistic in its portrayal of a woman helplessly stuck in the root of her mother-in-law, rejecting the fact that her child has grown up. And such representation was very far away from an acceptable view of socialist motherhood. As you can guess, the film was not favored by censors and labeled decadent and vulgar. In the end, Zhenya loses her temper in futile attempts to withhold just some control over her life. She and Sasha go out to see a performance, and when she spots that some strangers have unfairly occupied the seats reserved in advance, she demonstratively stands next to them, refusing to take another vacant seat. She stands still for a long time, ignoring irritated comments from guests whose view she is blocking, right until Sasha has to forcefully escort her out of the room. Zhenya cries bitterly while he's doing so, and I also cry bitterly when I have to rewatch the close-ups of beautiful Zinaida Sharkov playing the role. Then Sasha spends a moment comforting her. He tells his mother he's decided to stay with her, and Zhenya starts laughing. The tension between them is now soothed. The ending is somewhat open. The viewer has to decide whether Sasha actually meant what he said, or was it just an attempt to console his distressed mother. Initially, the film was unwillingly accepted by the State Committee of Cinematography, but 10 days later, without any explanation, the acceptance was withdrawn. A scandal followed, and then the Minister of Culture of Ukraine wrote a letter explaining that all the stylistic choices Muratova made in the film stained the final product with a grim atmosphere of disorder in life, once again underscoring the inappropriateness of deliberately complicated, unsocialist, bourgeois realism. Muratova was stripped of her film degree and prohibited from directing films for the next 7 years. She worked for a time in the Museum of the Odessa Film Studio and tried to write scenarios. Meanwhile, after Brezhnev's death and after some tossing around in the secretary's office, the leadership was passed to Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985, who became the first and the last president of the Soviet Union. He introduced two crucial reforms, Perestroika and Glasnost. Willing to erase the ramifications of Brezhnev's censorship, his agenda aimed to open up the political system. Glasnost, or openness, advocated greater freedom of speech and press, allowing for public criticism and even critique of government crimes. Perestroika, or restructuring, targeted the economy by decentralizing control. Did it mean that Muratova was finally free to produce films without any restrictions? Generally, yes. Early in the Gorbachev era, Kira's 3 short films were released, and she finally received long-denied recognition. Muratova described the turning point as if black became white. She recalled it with wit and irony. They started to make use of me for their own profit. Look how bad it was for Muratova and how good it's become for her. However, her film Aesthetic Syndrome, released in 1989 and most known for its blatant and most unapologetic critique of the regime, was briefly banned for nudity and swear words, this time for just expletive content. It's vital to remember that although Gorbachev's Glasnost significantly relaxed Stalinist-era censorship of sex as the subject of any artistic exploration, any content that would lean towards pornography would still be considered improper. Now we're gonna move forward in time for about 10 years to review some post-Soviet age Muratova cinema. But first, let's take a moment to process the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which caused subsequent economic and socio-cultural upheavals for the former nations. The downfall created a trapdoor for corruption and crime in Eastern European countries. Government infrastructure, ranging from basic public utilities to police services, mostly evaporated during the collapse. In lack of controlling authority, the Russian mafia, which had struggled to survive during the height of communism, stepped in to fill the power void. The environment people of the post-Glasnost and post-Perestroika world lived in correlated with the rise of Chernucha and dark narratives. It was almost as the barricades collapsed and all the cynicism ingrained within people's social narratives erupted. And that's what happened after years of extreme censorship. With all this in mind, let's turn to Three Stories, a black comedy produced by Kira in 1997 and composed of 3 separate sections united by a motive of revenge. And this particular film is a testimony to Muratova's adoration of absurd dialogues and verbal and visual repetitions. The first story, Boiler Room Number 6, showcases a clumsy, panicking Tikhomirov who comes to the boiler room aiming to persuade his friend worker Gennady to help him burn the body of the young woman neighbor who he killed over an argument about a soap bar. This section of the film feels extremely hectic and agitated, especially due to the experimental use of a sound. The rumbling of machines gets accompanied by Gennady yelling poetry lines and a man described as a gay slave singing half-naked. A second and longest section of Three Stories is a surreal chronicle named Ophelia about Ofa, an atomic blondie prowling streets in red lipstick and stockings in search of mothers abandoning their infants.
Я не люблю мужчин. Я не люблю женщин. Я не люблю детей. Мне не нравятся люди. Этой планете я поставила бы 0.
People call her just Ofa. She works in a maternity hospital and once promoted to the head of the archive files, she finds a long-desired file on her own mother, who abandoned her at birth. First, Ofa gets a taste for killing by casually yet brutally strangling an erratic young mother who she was previously taken care of at a hospital. She then proceeds to hunt down her own mother and murder her in the best Shakespearean canon. While Lady reads Hamlet, her orphan daughter pushes her out of the harbor, watching her drown just like Ophelia from the play. Muratova is known for involving side characters to give depth or foreshadow the story. The motive of unheard speaker or untold narrative plays an important role in brief encounters, as we discussed earlier, and it also recurs in Ophelia. There is a scene in which 2 deaf old ladies, mother and daughter, are shouting at each other, irritated by not being able to hear. According to Muratova, this scene originated 30 years prior to making Three Stories, when she was working on her diploma film. Hence, this means a lot for her understanding of communication.
Мама! Что? Ну, что ты хочешь? Мама, почему ты трубку не берешь? Почему не звонишь? Я звоню тебе, звоню! Почему ты не звонишь? Ты не слышишь звонок телефона? Я жду. Мама, ты не слышишь телефонный звонок? Я так волнуюсь. Я волнуюсь. Почему не звонишь? Я жду. Почему ты трубку не берешь? Я волнуюсь. Я волнуюсь очень. Что?
The third story, The Maiden and Death, follows a charming little girl getting upset at a wheelchaired grandfather babysitting her. Throughout the section, the grandfather tells the girl stories preachingly and unwittingly insults the girl's mother. The little devil devises a plan quickly and murders the man with rat poison. As in the other 2 parts, but I guess exceptionally here, the viewer doesn't anticipate such an innocent figure to be a slayer. All 3 stories portray the kinds of people who you wouldn't suspect resorting to kill, but the film demonstrates that bits of cruelty and sheer mania could dominate in the most innocuous-looking ones. Once describing herself in an interview, Muratova said, "I'm a very cheerful animal with sad brains." Filmography can be criticized and scorned down for indulging in the dark, unpleasant, and indelicate aspects of human nature, but the sense of tenderness she pierces her films makes them outstanding. And no matter how dark her films may come across, they're nearly as dark as the reality they reflect. The world Kira Muratova created in her films is left untouched by the political changes or shifting regimes, because in the face of state-sponsored cult, she was stubborn enough to create art by her own rules. And those not fond of her old style can at least appreciate her dignity and courage.
Я очень узкий человек, очень узкий. Такой вот как-то запрограммированный на кино. Я себя воспринимаю как запрограммированную, как некий автомат запрограммированный на кино. Если бы меня вложили в другую программу, в то время, когда я охотно открывалась программированию, я была бы иначе запрограммирована.